Okay, so I want you to turn to Ephesians chapter 4. And last week I started talking about this passage of Scripture, the first three verses. And it's like, I have a couple of passages that are kind of like almost like life verses. I got a lot of them. I mean, it is. But this is one of them. It's so intriguing as you study the Scripture and as you allow the Holy Spirit to speak to you and you just kind of meditate on things and all. It's amazing what shines through in different seasons of life. It was a large city, 30 or 40,000 people that were believers that Timothy was shepherding and ministering to. And here Paul writes to him, he says, "Therefore, I, the prisoner of the Lord." Think about your personal walk with the Lord, your Christianity, your churchianity, whatever you want to, your personal walk with the Lord. To have it even as a personal goal, to say, I am a prisoner of the Lord. Like I'm so bound to Him that I'm not free to do whatever I want to do. Because even Paul said, he says, sometimes, what I want to do, I don't want to, don't do. That's the things that I do. There's this tension that goes on in our lives. But could you say today that you are a prisoner of the Lord? He wasn't ashamed of it. He wrote a letter to 30 or 40,000 people, and then obviously it's been canonized, and thousands and millions of people have been reading this. And I don't think Paul is in the least embarrassed to say that he was a prisoner of the Lord. And he goes on and he tells them, he says, I implore you. It gets into strong language. I implore you, and look what he says, to walk in a manner worthy of the calling with which you've been called. And it's almost like he says, I'm a prisoner of the Lord, and I'm imploring you to walk as the same thing. To walk worthy of your calling. God has called you to Himself for Himself. Like, I can remember when my children were smaller and other kids that were their friends, either at church or in the neighborhood, they would come up and they would say, "Oh, you're Christopher's dad." You know, I never corrected them and told them my name because I wasn't ashamed to be Christopher's dad. And what I felt is like this child knows I'm Christopher's dad, so now I have to walk worthy of that calling and be a good dad. Or somebody would come up and say, "Oh, you're Jared's dad." It still happens. Last time we did something with Crossroads, like, "Oh, you're Jared's dad," because Jared, does a lot with them and for them. He works for Crossroads, and so they all know him. But they don't quite know me. They just know that I'm Jared's dad. Again, it's like there's this tension to walk worthy of that calling. I go out into my community, as many of y'all do. You're serving in so many different capacities, making life better for somebody else. And it's like, I don't know how many times in the last 6 months I've had to stand up and introduce myself, tell them what I do and why I'm in the place that I'm at right there. And as soon as I say, I'm a pastor of the Convergence, now there's the tension to walk worthy of the calling. And I'm not ashamed to be the pastor of this church. There's no shame of anything. He said, you've been called. God called you by name. Have you ever heard Him call you by name? Whether it was an audible voice, because that does happen, or the still quiet voice, where it was like Samuel. Samuel. Wakes him up. He runs over to Eli. Did you call me? No, it wasn't me. Go back to bed. Samuel, Samuel, did you call me? Eli's like, no, I didn't call you. It's probably the Lord. You need to listen. Have you ever had that moment where he called your name and spoke to you personally? If you haven't, would you please take time this week and get alone and get unplugged and get undistracted and just sit and listen? He goes on and he says, he names the 4 things that we're going to talk about over the next few weeks. He said, with all humility and gentleness and patience, showing tolerance for one another in love. Humility, gentleness, patience, and love. And what happens when we walk in humility, gentleness, patience, and love? It causes us to be diligent to preserve the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. Now, here's something that I noticed about this passage, is that I can't call you to humility or make you be humble. I can't do it. I have to choose. This is a choice. We sometimes we say, well, don't pray for humility because God, or no, don't pray for patience. But we don't want to pray for humility either because then we might get humiliated. Humiliation comes from the outside in, and what it produces is not healthy. But when I choose to be humble, because that's what I have to do, I have to choose. He's telling them, choose to be humble. And then it leads to these other things, because when I'm walking in humility, I have the ability to be gentle. And it's like all these 4 things are connected. And out of my gentleness will come patience because of love. But I have to make the choice. I'm not going to have true gentleness without humility. I'm not going to have true patience without choosing to be humble. I'm not going to walk in love without humility. And humility is my choice. The other 3 things are fruit of the Spirit, but the first one isn't. Humility is not a fruit of the Spirit. Listen to this passage out of the Passion Translation. As a prisoner of the Lord, I plead with you to walk holy, in a way that is suitable to your high rank, given to you in your divine calling. When God speaks to you and he calls you by name, that's a divine calling. That's a divine conversation. That's coming from the throne of God to us mere humans. That in and of itself, when we consider that and we meditate on that, will bring us to a place of humility, because I'm not all that when I look at the majesty of God. And true humility is not going to make me like a worm or a broken piece of dirt or dust or garbage. That's not what humility does. That's humiliation. Humiliation will cause somebody to feel like trash or to feel broken or insignificant. That's what humiliation does. He said, with tender humility, quiet patience, always demonstrate gentleness and generous love towards one another, especially towards those who may try your patience. Be faithful to guard the sweet harmony of the Holy Spirit among you in the bonds of peace, being one body and one spirit, as you were called into the same glorious hope of divine destiny. In order to have unity, I have to worry about myself. I can't look at you and say, you're not unified with me. It's not my place because I can't change you. It's not my job to change you. My job is to make the choices in my life. Just like giving, I choose to give. I choose generosity. I can choose all those things. And I'm not saying I always make the right choice, but those are the choices that are laid out for me. He said, choose you this day whom you will serve. He also said, I'm laying before you two choices, life and death. Choose life. I can't make you be or do anything. It's not my job. I'm not your boss. I'm none of those things. We each have to choose. All I can do is like Paul here is implore you and show you the things that he's shown me or what he's speaking to me. It's like in my marriage. You know, if I'm trying to turn Bonnie into something, then I'm really missing the point of marriage. And I don't know about you, but I probably did that for a really long time. Like, why can't you think like me? Because she wasn't supposed to. There's absolutely no way that she can think like I think. So why would I waste all of that time trying to change her? Same thing with our children. So many people try to mold their children after their own image and likeness and what their own likes and desires and all that is, of raising up a child in the way that they should go so that when they're old, they'll not depart. So the child comes out of our house launched like an arrow from a warrior's bow to hit the mark that God had for them. In my marriage, the only thing that I can do is become the best me. Every day. Every day, learning something new. Every day, doing something different. I mean, this over here today, this was my own fault. The playing of the guitar. I'm just learning, and that was my own fault. You know why it was my own fault? I didn't call them and say, hey, can I play guitar today? I did not do that. I don't know if I'll ever do that. But I've been gently nudging people into new things and trying new things and stepping into new things. It's boomerang back around at me. And so all of a sudden, 2-3 weeks ago, Anthony's like, hey, December 17th, is that what today is? 19th. What's today? 17th? Like, that's how confused I am by this whole thing. 17th, I want you to play acoustic guitar. I'm like, what? You've heard me. It was my own fault. It came back around and haunted me. Paul is telling them in this place, is telling them to make proper choices. Choose to walk in a manner worthy of your calling. Choose to walk in humility. Choose to walk in gentleness. Choose to walk in patience. Choose to walk in love. I did some research on this word humility. It's a fascinating word. It's really funny because we were playing Pictionary yesterday or whatever that was, where you draw things and you guess. And the men won. And we were just, having playful family banter. And I was out in the kitchen, and Kathy's mom comes up and says, you need to preach on humility tomorrow. She did. She told me that. And I looked at her, I said, I am. We were just having fun. It wasn't humiliating. We were just having fun. There's a difference. It was just so funny that she said that. It's a very prophetic family, the Borths. There's a lot of prophetic flow that comes in from both sets of parents, maternal parents and the paternal parents. There's a heavy prophetic anointing on that family. And they just say things sometimes. I'm like, oh, are you watching over my shoulder? It's just weird. So humility, the first sentence is, it's the quality of being humble. Well, that doesn't explain anything to me. Humble, okay. So I got this off of Wikipedia. for whatever that's worth, because people kind of add to Wikipedia, so you got to be careful on how much you trust it. But, I felt good with it. Dictionary definitions accentuate humility as a low self-regard and a sense of unworthiness. There's a portion of humility that goes along with that. A low self-regard. Think about that, though. A low self-regard. Because he says in a couple other places that I'll share that we are to regard others above ourselves. So a low self-regard is not unhealthy. Now, this whole thing about a sense of unworthiness, there is a sense of unworthiness in my relationship with God. It's like, I am not worthy, but on the flip side of that same coin, he makes me worthy. But I have to have a sense of that unworthiness because that does help me walk in humility. And I'm not even pretending that I have this down. I'm just sharing with you the wrestlings that are going on in my heart. It goes on, it says, in a religious context, humility can mean a recognition of self in relation to deity. A recognition of who I am in relation to God. See, if I think I'm all that and a peanut butter sandwich, it's a dangerous path. It goes on, it says, outside of a religious context, humility is defined as being unselved. Think about that word, unselved. It's not about me. Do you ever recognize things in your life that you're getting the opportunity to do, and it's not about you? The places that you can find yourself, and you look and you're like, this is pretty amazing. I didn't have a thing to do with this other than I got in the way. Humility sets us up to be able to encounter amazing things. But if we're pushy and pushing ourselves, it actually shuts things down. A liberation from consciousness of self. That phrase talks about us being in bondage to self-service and self-centeredness, selfishness. And you know what? That's the human nature. Left unchecked. I mean, watch a baby. They're the sweetest thing in the world, but they're very self-centered. And mom and dad have to be unselved to properly parent children. I mean, think about all the sacrifices. I had a really cool car back in 91 after the Gulf War. I had a really cool car. Man, I loved that car. It was almost like I've been waiting my whole life for that Camaro. Oh, loved that car. It was an unusual color. It was a teal color, and it was a beautiful thing. It had really great tires on it and aluminum rims, and it was just so amazing. Christopher fit in the back seat pretty easily. One child, Now, if you know anything about Camaros or Mustangs or cars like that, there's not a whole lot of back seat. Like my last, when I had my Mustang, the back of my seat, because of the way that I sat, was leaning on the back seat. Nobody could sit behind me like this. And we were good with the Camaro. Clear up until I had to put a second child in the back seat. And I looked back there as his mother is buckling him in one day. I remember the moment. And I looked back there and I was like, I can't keep this car. It's not his fault. He didn't ask, Dad, get rid of this car. I can't fit. Would you please bring me into the world? He never did that. That was all my fault. Again, came back around on me. True story. So I had to take that really cool Camaro that I loved into the dealership, and traded in on a minivan. A huge burgundy minivan. It wasn't like the minivans that are kind of almost semi-cool now. This was like a GMC Safari, uncool box on wheels that kind of it was. The one that you'll never own? Never again. I was so glad when they came up with SUVs because that kind of helped me with that struggle a lot. I had a bus for a while, but it was suburban. But it wasn't a minivan. A form of temperance that is neither having pride or haughtiness, nor indulging in self-deprecation. The word deprecation means oneself, belittling oneself, even humorously. Anybody know any golfers? Have you ever heard a golfer tell you how good he is? Anybody? Show me. It's okay. You have? Okay. A couple of you. It's half of what raised their hand first. How often does it happen? Very little? You tell yourself, that's good. That's self-talk. What? How often? Okay. But it's only one person. Somebody, right? Most of the time what golfers do is they tend to kind of really take down how good they actually are. Like Victor will tell you, like, I can golf better than he can. I maybe have been golfing longer, but golf is one of those games, it doesn't matter how long you've been doing it. If you're not doing it right, you don't get any better. And to hear Victor talk about his golf game, I get out there and I actually witness this and I'm like, what? Jeff is the same way. Jeff does things, he tells you, like, I'm not good at anything. And then you watch him do it and you're like, you are such a liar. There's two types of guitarists. There are guitarists that are kind of like, eh. But then there are others who are like, wah, 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 and they know power chords and can't read music. And many times that guitarist that's loud and obnoxious and knows power chords, on the inside is really insecure about who they are. It's hard to stand up. Like, I've been up in front of people for 30-some years. This was a whole different experience today. We practiced those songs, and I played them better in practice than I did when you guys were in here, and you weren't even watching me. You weren't paying no attention to me. And I trust Jared to have me turn down if I sound too horrible. I'm okay. And Christopher was loud enough to carry me, but yet I'm up there and I'm forgetting how to make chords. I've lost my rhythm. I don't know the chord progression that we're going through now. And I'm like, what in the world? I'm sweating. It's not easy to do certain things. But sometimes it's like I've just resigned myself that there are just going to be times that I'm going to be uncomfortable. Because sometimes we do things and it's not about us. It's not about us. I picked up a guitar a year and a half ago and I fiddle at best. But you know what I watched? A really good friend of mine started picking his guitar up and fiddling. And now he and his wife are having worship sets in their home for the first time ever that I know of. Because I picked up a guitar. And you guys know how I am. I'm loud about everything. If I'm doing something or I'm believing something or I'm into something, you know it. I don't hide it. Or how about the children that pick up instruments because they see us being uncomfortable and doing something new and learn, because it's not about me. My embarrassment and all that other stuff that was over there for a moment, it's not about me. So I can take myself out of that. But that's a hard thing to do. And there are certain things that it's harder in than it is others. But we're not supposed to indulge in self-deprecation. That's not true humility. Oh, I'm just a worthless worm in the kingdom. I just want a shack in glory. That's not humility. Matter of fact, that's a false humility that's actually based in self. And it doesn't empower anybody when we belittle ourselves. It doesn't empower anybody to be the best they can be and who they are. It doesn't empower them when we belittle ourselves. But on the other side of that, we don't need to think more highly of ourselves than we ought. It's tension. Materialistic, look at this. Materialistic view characterizes humility as self-restraint that frees oneself from vanity. Self-restraint. Humility and self-restraint when it comes to money and things. I mean, look at our culture. We have iPads. iPad. And when I get into my iPad, it's not about you. God's been messing with me on this one. And I watch it the most with my wife. I'm sitting there doing something on my iPhone, my iPad. Probably the only thing safe that I have is my MacBook because it isn't an iMac. But I'm there in my world, and it's all about what I'm doing. It's all about what I'm reading, what I'm listening to. And she can be talking over here, and I'm all about I don't know if you've ever sat down with somebody and have a conversation and their phone was more important than the moment with you. I've done it so many times. It makes every time, and I catch myself. I'm starting to think about it, and I catch myself, and I'm like, oh. I mean, how can I have my son teach me how to play guitar if I'm going to be on my phone texting while I'm in guitar lesson with him? I'm even, at that point, I'm even doing myself a disservice besides the fact of what I'm speaking to him, that right now this is more important. And there are times when there is emergency. I get that, but not near as much time as we think that there is. And I know from my own life. Humility is an outward expression of an appropriate inner or self-regard. When we walk in humility, people see it and experience it. But it started inside. Humility is an inside. Humiliation comes from outside. It comes from circumstances or people. That's where humiliation comes from. But humility is from the inside. Humiliation is external. It brings shame. It's an imposition when somebody humiliates us. I don't know about you. There have been times where I was humiliated because of my lack of humility. I can remember back when I was in the Army and I was a staff sergeant, and there was this one time, and by that time I'd been in for a while. I'd been in for 10 years. I was a staff sergeant. I'd been through some schools. I kind of knew what I was doing. And for me, the hardest person for me to deal with was my second lieutenant, platoon leader. Because he didn't know nothing. He'd just gotten out of school, and he was only going to be there for 18 months, and he was going to be gone. And it was just really hard for me to submit myself to his authority. And I could have great ideas that came out of experience and education, but the way that I presented, that's what my platoon sergeant took me aside in the desert. I can remember it just as plain. He took me aside in the desert and he said, many of your great ideas and your valid opinions are lost because of your lack of humility. Because I was pushy, and I was arrogant, and I was angry, and I was proud. And I would humiliate leaders sometimes. I told you a couple weeks ago, Bonnie was going through a devotional on unity because she's a part of a prayer group with some lady leaders in our community, and they're doing a thing on unity prayers and stuff. So she did a devotional out of YouVersion because they have reading plans and devotions in there. Pretty cool app. And the one on unity, she read it to me. We're just driving. I think she was trying to tell me something, but she would never try to change me. But the YouVersion devotional says this: humility has the perspective to put others first. You know, I could have crammed my boys in the back of that Camaro for years and just made them sit all crunched up as they got taller and lankier and have to sit sideways and their legs interlocked and all. I could have done that. They're not the boss of me, right? Neither one of them ever said anything about, Dad, could you please get us a GMC Safari? Please, Dad? Could you please? We just want some room. We want some places to hide those fries that we pull out while we're driving, and we ain't been to McDonald's lately. Isn't that the grossest thing ever? When kids pull out fries and you haven't had fries in the car in a while, oh. The perspective to put others first. It has the assurance that serving others is far more valuable than worrying about one's own life. You know, Jesus said that you can follow me because I'm humble of heart. It wasn't an arrogant statement. It was a true reality. It was a choice that he was making. He came and he humbled himself to serve. The greatest place to learn humility is in serving others. But you can be serving self while serving others. Because you can be standing there, it's all about me. Look at me. Look what I'm doing. So it's not like, you know, it still can be an issue. It goes on, it says, it's in humility that we consider others better than ourselves. And he said, that's hard if you're honest. Human nature is to think about ourselves first. Man, I'm cold. Man, it's so hot in my house. I got all these people over here, and y'all have body heat, and you've heated up my house, and I turn on the AC, and then I watch 2/3 of the group that's in there put on jackets because they got cold because I was hot. Humility would say, hey, is anybody warm? Anybody uncomfortable? Anybody? I'll just sweat, I guess. Putting others before self is hard and requires sacrifice. It means stepping back and allowing others to take credit. Because there's something on the inside of us. When we've done something that's good and somebody else is getting the credit for it, we want to correct. Say, no, they didn't do that. I did that. That was my idea. I've lived in this one. Because what I've found is that most of the time that I've been in ministry and leadership and serving, I've been a facilitator of other people's visions and dreams and destiny. And there's times where we can whisper something in somebody's ear and they own it and they walk in it and this thing happens. And you're like, the pride in me can be like, why aren't you giving me credit while you're up there? That's human nature. I'm not the only one that wrestles with that. We all do. So letting others take credit means celebrating the success of others. That can be challenging. And it doesn't stop. Like, you can do it like in your personal life, you can do it with your family. It's hard to celebrate other people's success, especially if we think that they don't deserve it. But it happens with organizations. Churches do it all the time. Listen to some of the things that are said about some of the churches that maybe have a large social media presence or a large television presence. You know what people do? They don't celebrate the awesome favor that they're walking in, what they do is they make excuses on why they're compromising. He's watering down the word. Really? Have you ever listened to him? More than once? Well, no. Somebody else said, oh. Why can't you celebrate him? Sowing and reaping. It works in everything. Whatever you sow, you will reap. And if you will celebrate others, others will celebrate you. You don't have to worry about celebrating yourself, because pride will make me celebrate myself. It'll make me push myself. It'll make me, kind of step in and push my agenda. But humility will cause me to elevate others. And thereby what happens is I'll start reaping these things, and it's like, golly, where did this come from? Jeez. Proverbs 15:33. I'm going to run through these real quick. I just want you to listen to them. Proverbs 13:33, or 15:33, sorry. The reverent and worshipful fear of the Lord brings instruction and wisdom, and humility comes before honor. You can have the superficial, circumstantial honor of men, or you can have the eternal honor of God, depending on if you'll walk in pride or if you'll walk in humility. Because if you'll accept this temporary, superficial, ever-changing, when you make a mistake or you do something that somebody doesn't like, immediately they're going to bring you down. But if you walk in true humility, God raises you up and nobody can do anything about it. Because haters going to hate, right? Proverbs 22:4. The reward of humility and the reverent and worshipful fear of the Lord. Isn't it amazing how those two things are going together? The reward is riches and honor and life. First Peter chapter 5, verse 6. 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 6. Look what it says. Therefore, humble yourselves. And look what it says. Demote or lower yourselves in your own estimation. Don't think of yourself more highly than you should. And that's not saying that you have no skills, that you have no gifts, that you have no talents. That's not what that's saying. Some of that is just recognizing where those things come from. Now, sometimes they do come from our hard work, and that's okay. Sarah worked hard to become a deputy. It says, you humble yourselves under the mighty hand of God. Again, worshipful fear of the Lord. And look what it says. And it could be like, so that. You can say so that there. So that in due time he may exalt you. It's better to be exalted by the Lord than it is to be exalted by men. We live in a culture that celebrates skill, but sacrifices character. Rick posted a video a couple weeks ago of a young man in high school playing basketball. Remember that one? The kid was good. And you watched him and you could see that he was good. But his team and his coaches remarked on how he gave things away to others to do. Because somebody who is good at basketball, for instance, but they're always the one that takes the shot, they're always the one that drives the goal. Nobody else can score because they have no practice, because they don't get a chance. This kid's greatness was magnified because he would give it away to others. He would give them opportunity. He used his skill to elevate the game of his team because he was actually walking in a spirit of unity and a bond of peace. His humility made that team strong. That's the way that it should be for the child of God, is that whatever we are involved with becomes unified. Whether it's something of God or it's something at work, there should be a spirit of unity and a bond of peace in that place because it comes from me. It comes from my humility, it comes from my gentleness, it comes from my patience, it comes from my love. And what it does is it spills over into the people that I'm working with, that I'm living with, that I'm living life, doing life with. And it makes it better. I realize I am here for this purpose, and I may not be the leader, but I'm going to make him look good. I'm going to do my best. I'm going to use my skills to serve somebody else's dream and vision and destiny. I'm going to close with that Ephesians 4 again, out of the Passion Translation. As a prisoner of the Lord, I plead with you to walk holy in a way that is suitable for your high rank. You're not worthy, but he makes you worthy. You're not righteous, but he gives you his righteousness. Given to you in your divine calling, called you by name. And it's like I can hear it as he's whispering every name in this place. As I'm looking around, it's like I can hear God whispering your name. Even people that watch on God is whispering your name. And he's calling you higher. And when we humble ourselves, he will exalt us. If we think that we're worthy of salvation, we can't celebrate when somebody else gets saved. We look at them like, man, you're a dirty, nasty sinner. I watched you doing this or that. Or God, really? That's that religious spirit, man. It starts bringing division, and it's prideful, and it's arrogant. And what happens is that when that haughtiness or that pride comes, destruction comes, and then humiliation. Because of sowing and reaping. Because when I'm prideful, I'm pushing somebody else aside, pushing somebody else down so that I can elevate myself. And what's going to happen is my platform is so weak, it's going to crumble. And great will be my fall. With tender humility, quiet patience, always demonstrate gentleness. And generous love towards one another, especially towards those who may try your patience. That's a troubling statement for me. I'm going to be honest. That's a troubling statement because we all have people who try our patience. And Jeff, you don't try my patience, so. And be faithful to guard the sweet harmony of the Holy Spirit among you in the bonds of peace. Being one body and one spirit, as you were called into the same glorious hope of divine destiny. That there's something inside of me that recognizes that my destiny is connected to you. And if I will lift you up and regard you higher than myself, I get to walk in the fullness of what God's called me to. And what's interesting is this humility is my choice, and it comes from within me. But then it bonds itself to those other three, and they're kind of synonymous and almost inseparable, but I have to make a choice. Will I choose to walk in humility and be humble? Because if I will, there'll be unity. If I got to be right, if I got to be first, if I got to be best, it'll bring division. It'll shut down my voice. It was an amazing thing that as soon as I started walking in a little bit more humility after that talk with my platoon sergeant, they started listening to me. That doesn't mean they did everything that I suggested, but the things that I said and suggested they were a lot easier for them to intake. It wasn't a struggle or a battle or a contention.